Okay, welcome back. In this third part of our section on microtubules, I want to take a little bit more of an in-depth look at some microtubule dynamics, and we're going to look at something called catastrophe here. So, when you think about an alpha and beta dimer, we have the alpha subunit, the alpha tubulin subunit, and that always has a GTP bound, guanosine triphosphate. So the alpha subunit always has a GTP bound, and that is never exchanged out for any other type of nucleotide. It's never hydrolyzed to GDP. The beta subunit, on the other hand, has GDP bound, and that can be exchanged for GTP. So when an alpha beta dimer binds to the positive or the negative end of a microtubule, the dimer has to have an alpha subunit with GTP bound, obviously, and the beta subunit must also have GTP bound. So both subunits have to have GTP bound to them. So there is a model for how microtubules polymerize, but then catastrophically shorten as well. And it's all to do with a cap of GTP bound alpha beta tubulin dimers on the plus end of the microtubule. So let's look at the situation where we have a growing microtubule here. So the microtubule is growing in the plus end. Here is the plus end, here will be the minus end. So if we have a high GTP tubulin concentration, so that's above the critical concentration for the plus end, is what will happen is the GTP tubulin will be added to the plus end. And so that means this end grows. And so is what we have is on the plus end of the microtubule, we have a cap of tubulin with GTP bound. Now, after a short amount of time of being polymerized, the beta subunit hydrolyzes its GTP to make GDP, guanosine diphosphate, and so the rest of the microtubule here in yellow is GDP bound alpha and beta tubulin dimers. So if we then drop the concentration of GTP tubulin, so it's now below the critical concentration for the plus end of the microtubule, is what happens is you can't add on GTP tubulin fast enough so that you can have a cap that's consistently present. Is what happens is the rate of hydrolysis of the GTP to GDP becomes greater than the rate at which you can add GTP tubulin to the plus end. And so once you get that situation and there's no GTP tubulin cap on the plus end of the microtubule, that's a trigger for the microtubule to spontaneously and catastrophically depolymerize. And so is what we see in cells, and you can track this, is if you track a microtubule or you manipulate a microtubule in vitro and modify the GTP concentrations such that you have varying concentrations above and below the critical concentration for the plus end, is what we see is that we can have growth, but then once we reach a critical concentration or a tubulin concentration and GTP tubulin concentration below the critical concentration for the plus end, we see loss of the GTP cap and catastrophic depolymerization. So what happens as we get depolymerization? Well, we get free tubulin, and that can have the GDP exchanged for GTP, and then we can have my cursor keeps disappearing. Then we can have more polymerization to the point where the microtubule is rescued, but then there may be another catastrophic event. And then there's polymerization and growth and catastrophe, rescue and polymerization, catastrophe. And so these concentrations of GTP, as they fluctuate, the microtubules are going to grow and shrink throughout the cell. Now they can become stabilized, and so there are proteins at the cell periphery which can bind onto the microtubule's plus end and stabilize it. The minus end we don't see as dramatic growth and catastrophe as we do at the plus end. So that's called microtubule catastrophe, and it's all to do with the concentration of free GTP tubulin, which forms a GTP tubulin cap and protects the plus end of the microtubule from catastrophic depolymerization. That's it for this section. I'll be back soon with more on microtubules. I'll see you soon.